Welcome to the Silent Thinking Podcast, a space to slow down, breathe, and reconnect. Today, I'm reading From the Way of the Three-Year-Old Why by Donn. Just listen and let the silence support you. Chapter 4 The Third Three-Year-Old Guideline, Monday, May 22. The blissful bean made getting the house blend easy. If you bought your own mug, you could drop $2 in the bucket, buy the row of airpots with the day's brews, and draw your own. But Dan preferred 4 shots of vanilla in his coffee, so he always stood in line. Today, no one else stood in line, a rarity, so he went straight to the cash register to find Kelly behind it. "Hi, Dan," she almost glowed, genuine warmth with no veneer. Staff tended to not wear name tags, but he remembered Kelly's name, and it impressed him that she remembered his. Maybe she does that with all the regular customers, he thought, although he seldom saw her at cash register. He thought she mostly concocted special brews while others took care of orders. Still, it was nice to be recognized. "Hi, Beck Kelly. You're very energetic for a Monday morning." "How could you not get energized working at the Blissful Bean?" she said. "I'm surrounded by caffeine. Of course, it's the people who keep me energized. Like I enjoyed hearing about your start in the speaking business. I've done a bit of that myself." "Oh, really? What topics?" "Different topics depending on what the audience needed to hear," she said. "Mostly small audiences, sometimes audiences of one." She laughed, a sound like a melody, but unself-conscious. "But our last conversation left me wondering. You told me how you got into speaking, and I heard all the reasons you stuck with it, but I felt like maybe there was something missing. You seemed to spark up when you talked about writing in your early days. Can you tell me a little more about that period?" Dan looked quizzical, and she said, "I am interested in writing too. I'm more interested in epic poetry and that sort of thing, but I love all sorts of writing. Just wondering." Dan checked behind him and saw no one there. In fact, the entire coffee shop had gone quiet, as if just the two of them stood at the cash register conversing. "As long as I'm not holding anyone up, I have to admit it was magical," he said. "I didn't like school in the early days and spent a lot of time in the principal's office. I hated the stuff they forced you to read, making it just a chore. But then I discovered in 6th grade you could have fun reading books nobody made you read. Who knew?" They both chuckled at that. "Do you remember those first books?" she asked. "I can tell you exactly the first one. Our little town had a hole-in-the-wall public library, and I wandered in there one day. For some reason, I pulled Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert A. Heinlein off the shelf. Read it straight through in one afternoon. Heinlein amazed me with the way he could put me right in a scene and make me hear his characters in my head. I returned that one and checked out the another one of his Podkane of Mars, then Red Planet, then Starship Troopers. "Wow," she said. "You remember those special titles after all these years?" "Are you implying I'm old?" He smiled, and she smiled back without embarrassment. "I can't tell you every book I've read, but I remember those first ones. I read every Heinlein book they had, and then Isaac Asimov, Harlan Ellison, Jerry Pournelle, A. Doug Smith, Red Bradbury, and others. Eventually, I thought I should like to do that." As Dan talked, Kelly noticed him standing straighter, looking off into the distance of his memory, and smiling softly. She kept quiet and listened. "That's when I wrote those first stories. I have them tucked away somewhere. written in longhand in pencil. They are hard to read. The pencil has faded, but they are also so bad. I had no clue about plotting. Sometimes I just wrote about characters doing things I wanted to do, traveling in space, making friends, and so forth. But they didn't actually do anything. I guess it was like Seinfeld years before he was cool. I didn't want to cause trouble for the characters, just wanted them happy. Then laughed to himself, remembering those early efforts. Of course, any writer knows you have to put your characters in difficult circumstances. Otherwise, nobody will care about them. So eventually, I learned to, as one writer said, get my characters up a tree and throw rocks at them. But then I couldn't figure out how to get them out of the tree. More than once, I wrote something like, and then the ship blew up. The end. Lame. This time Kelly laughed along with him. I ran into the editor of our little hometown newspaper on the sidelines of the high school football games. He let me hang around the office, running errands, fetching coffee, and such, and he put up with my questions. Sometime later, he let me write a story, an obituary, if I remember correctly. I must have done all right, because he let me write a news story, then another one, and another one. Eventually, I needed to actually earn some money for gasoline and dating and other high school stuff. When I told him I was leaving to take a job driving a delivery truck, he started paying me to keep me around. You must have been doing okay as a writer for him to want to keep you. You want to know the truth? Then looked right and left, then leaned over and whispered conspiratorially. I think I worked cheap and provided him with a copy to fill the paper. It wasn't exactly Pulitzer Prize material. Most of the stories concerned city council meetings, church potlucks, and community events. But I started getting a feel for words on paper. And when I say feel, I mean feel. When language is right, you can tell that it just fits. The way a properly sized head just fits. He paused, closed his eyes, and said, I've never been able to describe it any other way. I'm supposed to be handy with words, but I'm at loss to come up with a better description of what writing is for me, always has been, and still is. It felt that way with those silly little 12-year-old stories, and it feels that way now even when I write marketing copy. I love speaking, don't get me wrong, but there's something different for me about writing. The man in line behind him said, That sounds really cool. Then startled, looked around for Kelly before realizing she had slipped away. The guy smiled at him, and the woman behind him peered around to add her smile. Then blushed, then grabbed his cup with 4 shots of vanilla and headed to the fill your own station. The guy behind him turned to the woman and said, It's kind of cool to hear people talking about the things they care about. Who was he talking to? She said. I think he must have been on the phone. You can never tell with earbuds these days. I hate my hands, Dan heard as he came in the front door. Uh-oh, he thought. I better not give a cheery greeting today. Grace hadn't expected him home yet, but he had come home to grab the headphones he had forgotten that afternoon. He hesitantly opened the bedroom door and poked his head in. Safe to come in? He asked. How have your hands offended you? Grace sat upright in the bed, her laptop open on one side on the little table bed, and her new graphics tablet on her lap. She had her arms crossed and her hands tucked into her armpits. Her face displayed something between a frown and a pout. They just won't work. I know what you mean. I can never get my hands to do what my brain wants them to. You've never been able to. I once could, but I can't anymore. Dan looked hurt. And Grace immediately said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound so bad, but I'm so frustrated. I know, he said, and you're right. It is not the same thing. Do you think something's wrong with the tablet? No, the tablet's fine. It's taking exactly what I'm giving it, but I just can't draw like I used to. How long has it been since you drew anything on any medium using a pen or a brush? I don't know. At least 5 years, I guess. And how often did you draw before your arthritis goes so bad? Probably every day, she said. Toolboxes, draft tablets, stacks of sketchpads, canvases, framed finishing paintings, raw charcoal drawings, and half-finished penning pieces filled Grace's craft room. Her arthritis had hit suddenly, like an Arizona thunderstorm, interrupting multiple projects. Do you think that maybe, just maybe, you are rusty? Grace once again crossed her arms and tucked her hands but looked decidedly angry this time. I don't know, maybe. So give it time. Maybe, if you keep at it, you'll regain enough dexterity to at least be as slightly satisfying. She said nothing more, so Dan turned and went to his home office for the headphones. When the door shut, Grace mumbled, Sometimes I just want you to listen, not fix it. But he's right, she thought, despite the gap between the picture she held in her mind and that on the computer screen drawing again, or at least the attempt felt good. The feel good outweighed the hurts bad in her hands. She sighed, cleared the screen, and started over. Then took his coffee and retrieved headphones back to the table where he had set up his laptop, sipping it even though it had grown cold. His mind drifted back to his talk that morning with Kelly, and those science fiction books of long ago. He had read none of them for several years. Modern science fiction didn't hold his attention, mainly, though he thought he didn't have time to read. Only weeks before, he and Grace had made a trip to the Barnes& Noble store in a nearby city, the first time they'd been in a physical bookstore in a couple of years. Since hope had arrived in their lives, Dan found it harder and harder to read, hard to focus for any length of time, since her care required frequent interruptions. Even after they had jumped through all the state's hoops to qualify for nursing care for Hope, Grace's increasing challenges had added to the interruptions. Such interruptions robbed him of the ability to concentrate on anything, even fun activities. Reading had always been his primary enjoyment, second only to the satisfaction of writing. But in the last decade, he couldn't finish reading even a magazine article. Like so many people, he wasted hours on social media, flitting from post to post, with each holding his attention just long enough to spark a bit of dopamine to relieve the stresses of daily life, but giving no creative or learning satisfaction. At least when he worked on a speech or marketing materials, he could get slight creative satisfaction in short bursts. He could focus on a 3 or 4 paragraph email long enough to have some impact before having to, once again, stop and tend to something more urgent, if not more important. It hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened the way the mythical frog gets buoyed, through slow change. When was the last time he read something just for fun? He shook his head, opened up the laptop again, and found a vintage postcard lying on the keyboard. Yellowed and tattered, someone had addressed it to him. There was no stamp or postmark. Its front showed a cover for a fantastic science fiction magazine from February 1952. Probably a reproduction, though. The card looked old enough to date from that time. The ink in the address and the message appeared faded with age, but the handwriting looked familiar. The same handwriting that had appeared on the mysterious notes over the last few days. Donn pulled out his glasses and focused on the message. Don't discount emotion, then, it read. Humans are emotional creatures. We're not just emotional, but we ignore emotion at our peril. It is one of the most important ways you communicate with yourself. Why you shouldn't act on emotion without thinking about it, you should pay attention. Ask yourself what it means. No signature again. How had this note wound up tucked in his laptop? Had someone messed with the computer? He checked the screen, but the machine appeared still locked behind its passcode. This is getting weirder, he thought, but the notes all seemed related and on target somehow. Then looked around, but nobody watched him for a reaction to the note. Not sure what prompted him to do so, he took out his sketchbook, turned to the list he had started, and wrote. The third guideline. Look for the emotion. A 3-year-old mainly responds to emotion, as we all do. He just doesn't hide it. Without emotion, there is no motion. He considered what he had written and thought, no motion. I haven't been moving, but I felt moved today. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with me. If this brought you peace, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might need a little stillness too. Until next time, keep listening inward.